Welcome, welcome, welcome to Soul Conversation Podcast. And shortly, I will be introducing you to a beautiful young lady by the name of Adrian. She's with 5D Crystalline Emotion, and she is going to be giving us some great information about emotions. And I really love her her style of her lives and how much information that she brings to the table. And hold on, she's here now, giving us a wave, and we're going. Hello, hello, hello. We're going to go live. We're going to ask this young lady for some information about emotions. How are you? How are you?
Hello, good morning. I know it's probably not morning for everybody, not too many people since we're on the West Coast.
Yeah, we're starting our day, and a lot of people say, "Oh, they start their day late," but you know what? It's all right as long as the day gets started, right?
Exactly. Grateful for that always.
All right. So let me give you a little history behind 5D Crystalline Emotion. This is Adrian. She's a new paradigm coach, and she has a channel for Crystalline Emotion. You're also a marriage family therapist, right? For 17 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, so just give us a little background on what got you started, and let's dive deep, or as deep as we can, for at least an hour, if
Yeah.
that if for as long as you have time for. Let
Okay.
me know.
I just want to say hi to Zachary. Zachary is saying hello in the comments. So are you asking like how I got started with Crystalline Emotion or being a therapist?
Why don't we just give a little of both, because that's who you are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was a marriage and family therapist for 17 years. It's like I'm one of those weird people who knew like right away in their life what they wanted to do. So, good morning. That's what I went into. You know, I traveled the world a little bit and then I went straight into my master's degree program. So what's interesting actually is that I'm also a registered art therapist. So when I studied to be a marriage and family therapist, I studied the same track to be an art therapist. And what's interesting about that is in art therapy, we're looking at the symbolism, we're looking at the process of things, and spirit works in symbols versus like words so much, right? So for
Right.
me, my psychic gifts are mostly clairvoyant. So spirit shows me images. So it's interesting that spirit gave me that like training and that life path to be an art therapist and really hone that ability to understand images and patterns so that I could be prepared to use my psychic gifts. It's really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And,
then go ahead.
no, and I was going to ask, how did that transition into the 5D, the crystalline emotion?
Yeah. So it was a weird thing. Like I wasn't trying to get the information. I wasn't even trying to become like a trained psychic. One day I was just on this like webinar. I think it was about an eclipse. And all of a sudden they're like, how to train to be a professional psychic. And I'm like, what's this? Like, what webinar am I on? And then I was like, oh, they're talking to me. And I decided that I would train to do that. And so I used to do readings for people. And then really my guidance was telling me like your gifts are not to give people readings. Your gifts are to be a channel for crystalline emotion to come through. So I think it was in 2018, maybe it was 2019, I was in Mexico and going through like a tower moment in my life, and all of a sudden spirit came in with this massive download about emotion. And emotion is multidimensional. It's not just anger, sadness, disappointment like we know it. It actually has higher dimensional versions of it. And it's actually, think about it like a musical note, but it has many octaves. And the octave of an emotion is how we experience it depends on how we meet it, right? So even this morning, I had massive tears come through. Um, Grief was really strong. And there's a difference between if I would have met that with resistance, like try to push it away and been like really polite about it and be like, no, I'm okay, like I'm okay. Or I met the holy tears, that makes a difference. The grief is grief. That's the note. the octave is different depending on how you meet it. So an emotion is a frequency, and we have control over what frequency it actually holds depending on how we meet it. So that's how multidimensional emotion works. And once I started to know that, I was like, I can't be in the box of the medical model of therapy. Like my clients would come and I could see how the information that I was getting would be so helpful, but I couldn't in the medical model of therapy talk about this to my clients. They won't, it's not allowed. And so I felt like I couldn't bring everything that I could offer my clients to the therapy room. And so I was like, okay, I have to find another way. And that is how I became a coach.
Yeah. Yeah. Fifi says emotions are multidimensional. And yeah, it took me a while. And when I mean a while, I mean, ever since I started my spiritual journey, I would always basically deny my emotions in order to think of something brighter,
Yes.
instead of, oh, I don't want to deal with the extreme discomfort of it or that it's giving me. So I just, okay, push it down or push it back and cover it up with something more happy or whatnot. So when I started listening to you, it was like, oh, you mean it's okay to ask, well, who am I in this emotion? And what is this emotion going to bring to the table for me as I'm letting go of it, or as I'm letting it, as actually getting on a surfboard and riding the gentle wave of it until it ceases. That's my version of what I gathered from you. But I know there's more depth to that.
Yeah. And I think, it's so beautiful the way you're talking about it. Like you're riding the wave of the emotion and it's until it completes. And that's the point, is that we are not taught about completing emotions. We're taught about either, as you said, like covering them up or being like polite about them or pushing them down or try to think of something brighter. We're
Yeah.
not taught about how to actually meet them and how to be with them. And the meeting them and actually having presence with them is what helps them complete. It's not a magical formula. You just wrote a nap. That's so cute. Um, so the so I see a question, and I'm gonna come to it in a second.
Yeah.
The,
Hold
the
on.
the thing is that completing an emotion is not that big of a deal, but we've been conditioned so much to stop emotion, because if you're angry, if you're sad, it's low vibe. And it's like, it's not low vibe. Being afraid is okay. Being afraid can actually be very high vibrational. And what I mean by that is, like, have you ever been in a room with someone who's not feeling well, but trying to hide it and trying to be like positive, but you can feel all the stuff underneath it? Like, that doesn't feel high vibe. You're just like, what is this? Like, oh, no. But the person's being really nice. So you're like, is it me? Is it them? That's not high vibe. High vibe
Right.
is authenticity, right?
Right. Yeah. I felt that often, and I felt it feels kind of like something's off, you know, and more than likely in the past I would go, is there something you need to tell me? And then they would get offensive, or
Yeah.
or not offensive. Yeah, offensive. They would go, what do you mean? You know, um, you know, what's wrong? That kind of thing. They would take it to a negative. But
Yeah.
in that, I realized that sometimes it's about letting them get comfortable, and eventually they just might, then again, they might not feel comfortable enough to say, something really, I went through something today and I kind of like to talk to someone about it. And actually, I had to become a better listener, because I always want to help people, but sometimes it's about just the listening,
This, right?
right?
It's and when we care about someone, we don't want to see them in pain, right? But when we can bring our presence to it, and just literally the most loving thing we can do is to be with somebody, literally be present with them. And it's the same thing with our emotions. So can we let other people have their journey, have their emotions, and can we let ourselves, like, our emotions also are not that personal. Like, they come from, first of all, we hold them in our DNA, And and for generations, like all the uncompleted emotions from our ancestors and our soul lineage, we hold all of that information in our DNA. And then we have experiences like today for me, the grief. Happy Friday. The grief came up, and that grief is something that's not just mine, but it comes through other lifetimes, it comes through other generations. And then when I can complete it and I can release it, I'm releasing it for all, right? And all of this information starts to come forward. So
Okay.
it's something that's like it's not just about me, it's about so much that's happened before me. It can even be about the planetary transits. It just happens that source kind of sets up a situation so that I experienced grief today. And that's not just for me, it's for all. It's not that personal. My only job is to be a great vessel for it. Can I
Right.
be a great vessel for emotion? And can I be present for somebody else's emotion while they're going through that?
Uh, yeah, I felt that I actually felt that way when I read that Lisa Marie Presley had passed.
Mm-hmm.
I literally felt like that energy for everyone who was mourning her, everyone who had been present while she was growing up, and that whole kind of thing, because you become part of what is closest to you as you're moving through your stories. And even if your stories are like based off of, Elvis Presley, he was a great artist. He was just a great artist. And she and him, that was family, and you felt like family. But when I actually heard that, I felt loss. But it wasn't just, I didn't understand it. And before
Yeah.
you actually, now that you've actually put the pieces together for me, it's a collective loss. And
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It's big. We feel it in so many ways, right? Like you can feel it about someone that you don't you don't personally know. You can feel like what's going on in the collective. You can feel it about your own personal things. Like emotion is such a powerful connection point. It's a
Right.
vibrational thread. Do you want to go back and see the question?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me see. I believe that was Melissa. Um, does this mean, does emotions belong to me or someone else?
Yeah. Okay, I think she might have said something before too.
Oh, okay. Let's
Oh,
see.
okay, maybe she was just responding to. Okay. So, how do you know if emotions belong to you or someone else? That's such a great question that always comes up when we're talking about emotions. So, most of the time, I mean, there are different tricks that people use. Sometimes you can explain it by human design. So, if you know human design and you know that your solar plexus, which is the emotional center, is defined, or you know that it's undefined, that'll make a difference. If it's undefined, then you're more prone to feel other people's emotions and amplify them actually.
Okay.
If you have a defined solar plexus, which I do, then this means that I feel I feel everything, and I'm supposed to go through the waters of the emotions and all that. If you have an undefined solar plexus, you're supposed to stay on the beach and watch the water. Um,
Ah,
I mean, it's a complex thing, but it is, your human design does come into it. If we take human design out of it, what I would say is, if you go into feeling of the emotion in your body, like literally, what's the sensation? Do you feel heat in your chest? Do you feel a catch in your throat? Do you feel like heat on your shoulders? Like what the sensation feels like. If you start to really tune into that, it will usually decrease if it's not yours. Like if you get more connected to your body, that sensation will actually decrease.
hmm.
And if you start thinking about the other person and focusing on the other person, it will increase, and that's how you know it's not yours, it's theirs. Sometimes too, over the course of time, you want to develop kind of a little vocabulary of your own of like what it feels like when it's someone else's stuff and not your stuff. For me personally, if it's someone else's stuff, I usually feel like a rotten feeling like in my solar plexus. And
Okay.
that lets me know it's kind of like it's not mine. It's like someone's trying to push it off on me, and sometimes not even consciously. I can just sense it and I'm like, oop, that's not for me. And I pull back my energy, or I might even like clear and leave the room. Or I just say to myself, okay, that's something someone else is dealing with and I can be with that if that's what they need to be in. So
Okay.
hopefully that answers your question.
So my question on top of that,
Yeah.
is it possible that we take on other people's emotions unconsciously.
Totally.
And if we're unconscious to that, how, if we're, I'm going to try to ask this question. If we're unconscious to that, how does that work within us? Does will it make us more anxious? Will it make us more um, willing to push all emotion away, or try to bury it really deep, or just have outbursts? Will the emotion just be big if we just let it go Mount Vesuvius kind of?
I think it really depends on how you yourself like process emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're just not gonna know like until it repeats, you know, like you just won't see it. You'll feel it like it's your own, and then you're like, and then you'll feel it again and be like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense for my experience. And then you'll be like, oh, I was taking on my best friend's emotion, my sister's emotion. I just saw her up here. Um, and or it's my partner's emotion, and you will see it over patterns. So this is why self-awareness is so key, because when you have self-awareness, you're taking note of how things feel. You remember. So, you know, there are times where I reckon it was even like 2 weeks ago, I was realizing that I was taking on one of my partner's feelings, and I was feeling very protective of him. Like I didn't want to share something with him because I was so worried about his feelings and anticipating what he would feel because he had felt that way in the past. And I was like, aha,
Mm-hmm.
aha. You know, so sometimes we don't know until it's a pattern, and it's okay.
And then when you find out it's a pattern, how do you how do you how do you ride that wave of that pattern to release it, right?
Yeah. So
we're
this,
we're not riding the wave to keep it or to tame it.
right. We're just seeing it. And it's also just it's the difference in how you see it, right? So our perception is one of the biggest factors of living multidimensionally. Everything is here now. The only limiting factor is our perception. So the more our perception expands, the more awareness we have, the more we get to travel between dimensions. So the more we have access to that information. So when it comes to, you know, you notice the pattern of like, oh, I'm actually feeling someone else's feeling. It's simply the awareness of that and being like, okay, that's not mine. Like, oh, that's my partner's anxiety. Like, I'm going to breathe with myself while I'm present to that. And it's not, I'm not trying to fix it, change it, stop it, or make it wrong. It's just, that's what's there. And I'm not responsible for it, but I can regulate my nervous system while I'm in the presence of it.
Okay,
Does that answer?
so you allow it to be present, you recognize that it's not yours, and then you allow it to be there. You don't judge it. There's no judgment in it.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's
That's
this is a tall order.
Yeah, yeah. As beings, we're taught to judge everything, So yeah, it's a whole. It's a retraining your mind, body, and soul to allow this process of your emotion, right?
100%. It's so opposite. Like what emotions actually need is so opposite than how we've been conditioned, right?
Right.
We're conditioned to push it down, stop it, make it brighter, happier, easier for everyone else to consume, you know?
Yeah. Or we're taught to go ahead and let it explode, and then everybody else is supposed to understand your explosion, and they are supposed to forgive you. You
Yes.
know.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, explain the word crystalline. Okay. The-
Yeah.
Now, I know that butterflies do a crystal kind of thing with, cocooning and going through the process where they're changing and becoming this butterfly. Is that the same way that we see emotion?
I mean, it is. I mean, in some ways, it is. The crystalline part comes from, you know, our DNA becoming crystalline. So going from the like two-strand DNA, like carbon-based DNA and like world, we're moving into, you know, there's more and more light that's being infused into our DNA as the world is changing, right? Like we're in the ascension process, and so our DNA is changing to crystalline, and everything about us is changing to crystalline, and it's a slow process. and our emotions are part of that process. So instead of it being like you think of like the carbon has like a density to it,
Right.
right? And that's like how we experience like 3D emotions, especially when people are like really afraid of emotion, and we all have it. Like
Hmm.
we're afraid of anger because we don't want it to hurt someone. It's hurt us before, you
Right.
know. When people are not used to being with their emotions, they're very dense. Like people get really serious. Have you seen this? Like people who are not good with emotions will get very, very serious around emotion. And it feels like a big problem has happened versus, for example, last week I was in yoga and the yoga teacher was like, yeah, in my husband's household, they never had any confrontation. In our household, we fight it out for a second and then we were like, all right, what's for dinner? And it's not a big deal. They're just
Right.
like, ah, like no, and then it's fine.
Then yeah, and then it's yeah. That's well, my mother. It wasn't a fight out kind of thing, but it was like, okay, we're all discussing this. Everybody give your opinion, put it on the table, and the thing was, my mother didn't judge it. She said, everybody say what you think, and then she'd walk away and go, okay, time to do clothes, do laundry. Let's get ready and go do laundry, because everybody got to say what they said. It wasn't about judging. When I was a kid, I didn't know what I don't even think she had a name for it. That's just the way our household was,
I love
right? But
Yeah.
it didn't pay it. It didn't totally pay it forward with me as life started to as I started to allow layers to be covered, to cover up some of that good training that she imparted on me. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's when, as we're moving through life and our human experience, like there are a lot of things that can feel very dense. And as we learn to be with those things, including emotions, they start to carry a different density, a different frequency, and that's where they become multidimensional. And the same thing with emotion. Emotion, when we meet it and we allow it to metabolize, it actually changes density, which is how it becomes 5D crystalline emotion. It's more infused with light. And
Mm,
that affects our DNA as well. It's part of how we're changing.
okay. Okay. Is that okay? So is that where would I was looking at a couple of your flyers of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Does the vibrational thread, is that part of uh the the crystalline emotion of learning where those DNA threads are? Is that what that is? Is that part of it, or is that something different?
Yeah. So the vibrational thread is a masterclass, and you can go to the link in my bio and you can sign up for it right there and it'll be sent to your email. It's like an hour long. It's a masterclass. And essentially what it's talking about is nonlinear time. So, you know, and emotions are related to this. So linear time is a mental, you've heard people talk about this, is like it's a construct for our human mind to understand and make sense of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Spirit doesn't have anything in time. Like, when you get messages from Spirit and they're like soon, and you're like, well, that could be like 10 years for them. I don't know. Or it could be in 2 seconds. I don't know. Um,
Right.
because time is just human. So what's actually happening in reality is we're moving vibrationally. Time is not moving.
Right.
And one of the ways that we're actually moving vibrationally is through the vehicle of our emotions. So our emotions are think of something that you really desire, right? You were talking about it today in your live.
Right.
Um, so there's something that you desire. Since everything exists at once, that thing that you desire, whatever it is, let's say it's the Maserati or whatever, that
Right.
exists. You owning a Maserati exists in some place in time. You
Right.
all of a sudden once you desire it, then there's a vibrational thread that's connecting you and that moment in time when you're the owner of that Maserati, right? And then there's all these emotions that happen on your journey there. So it's like that place that has your desire is sending you these like vibrational threads. And we
Ah,
think something bad is happening, like, oh, I feel grief, like, oh, I feel irritation, oh, I feel whatever I feel. We
right.
think that we're moving away from it, but what's actually happening is as we improve our relationship with emotion, we're meeting higher octaves of it, and that's moving us vibrationally toward the that thing that you're
Desire.
the Maserati in this case.
Right.
So
Wow.
so the vibrational thread is literally the emotions that are connecting you with that desire. And we think that negative emotions are turning us the wrong directions. That's not
Right.
it at all.
Yeah, that's what I used to think. I used to think the negative emotion was, well, I'm going in the total wrong direction. I have to do an about face. And oh, this is making me feel terrible, terrible, terrible. I have to do a about face. And even when I did the about face, I was still feeling that terrible, terrible, terrible as I was moving in a different direction. So does that mean that the emotion of where I was going and I was going in the right direction is still, it's following me now, keeping that feeling of now I'm feeling even more terrible and more terrible. Is it growth? Is that what it does? Does it grow in that process until you actually figure it out in about face and go the other way?
Yeah, it really what it wants to do, like every experience and emotion has a function. Spirit doesn't care if you like it or don't like it. Like, spirit's like, we're doing the thing. And you're like, I don't like it. And they're like, well, this is how it goes. So, what's really trying to happen, like for me, I'll just, because it's so alive, this experience of grief that I had this morning, like just because I'm experiencing grief doesn't mean and I'm moving towards something I desire. I'm experiencing grief on my way there. And the grief doesn't mean shut down the desire, take it away. It
Mm-hmm.
means who am I becoming as I meet this grief, right? Am I becoming a person who can tolerate greater bandwidth? So that greater bandwidth will be what I have when I finally get to the place where I meet what I desire. What I desire is going to require a lot of emotional bandwidth. And so spirit is going to prepare me all the way there. And the grief, the 5D version of grief is creation. So as soon as grief is coming up, I am on my way. Like,
I never looked at it that, I looked at it as your creation is, I looked at it, well, I did that on my live this morning, that creation is love and manifesting combined, and and the growth of that love for what you want. But I never considered that, you know, if you're having some kind of negative emotion moving towards what's about to, like, be dropped in your lap as manifestation, you
right,
know.
right. And you're right on the money. And from my perspective, love has everything to do with it. Like, did I like the way I was feeling this morning? No. Can I love it? Yes. And the way I love it is by letting it be there, by being with it. The most beautiful thing that we can do is to be with, right? So I'm going to show it my love by giving it my attention, by letting the tears fall, right? And that is loving it. And then there's the piece of how there was something you were saying about creation, um, creation and love. Maybe that was all I wanted to say, but we think that love looks a certain way. Loving it is being with it. I didn't like it, but I loved it.
I think that I know I did another live where source all of source, I believe, and other people might not believe this yet, because when they're feeling a negative thing, they're really in it and they can't get anywhere above looking through it to see something positive coming out of it. But source is going to let us have whatever we want, even if it makes us feel bad, because source says, I'm letting everything happen. Everything is a possibility. So even in your grief, that's a possibility. If you want to feel it, feel it.
Yes.
But I know that source gave me, direction, that you feel it, yes, but you don't live in it. And so I think that's my next question is, how would you tell, depending on the person and their vibrational strength in their grief, how do you explain to a person that they have to move through it? But yes, you can tell them you embrace it, give it love, but how do you explain to them that through this crystalline emotion, how do you explain to them that they can't stay there, especially when they're missing, like, their mom. I mean, for
Mhm.
me, that was it. You know, my mom died, I think, when I was 30. She's been gone 30 years. And it was like every time I cried, I just cried.
Right.
But I didn't want to not be around people. So I always went to work and I was always around people. But every time I would look at something, I would just, all these tears would cry and I'd feel bad about crying.
Yeah, that's the piece right there is that like we have a, it's so tricky because we get the story on top of the feeling, and the story on top of the feeling is what where the problem is. Because I remembered what I was going to say with grief. Grief is love. Grief is love that has no like where to go in terms of like the physical, right? Like we're just holding it. Like my mom came to me. I also my mom also passed away, and the first year of her anniversary, she came to me and she said, "The love that you feel is what keeps me alive. So be strong enough to feel the grief so you can feel me." And so when grief comes to me about her, I'm like, I'm so freaking grateful that I feel this love right now. It is love.
Mm-hmm.
My mom and I's relationship is so beautiful since she passed. I mean, we had a great relation, like our relationship healed a lot in the course of my life. Thank God before she passed away. But
Mm-hmm.
there's been a beautiful creation of our relationship since she has passed. And she's really shown me so much about grief and love there.
Right. Okay.
So, so there, what you're talking about is someone flooding and not being willing to let the emotion actually move through it, like move through. Emotion is meant like a wave, like how you described it. It's meant to complete. And there might be many waves of grief, and that's okay. But it's letting it go all the way through. And the best way to do that is to wait for the sensations in the body. So that means clear the story in your mind. Like we have the story of like, oh, I shouldn't be crying. Like, oh, like grief is a bad thing or whatever story we happen to put on top of it. If we can keep on clearing the mind and just focus on the sensation in the body, the sensation will go down.
Right.
And we
Okay.
have to allow it. Like be willing to let it move through and let it be complete. Like today when I was in my grief, I did not want anyone around me. I was like, ugh, like this is so painful. And my partner was with me and he was like, I wasn't pushing him away. He started rubbing my back and the sensation actually went down. And I was like, I had a moment where I was like, I wanted to cling to the grief. I was like, no, I don't want to feel better right now. And I was like,
Oh,
but it actually is feeling better. So I'm going to let that be. We have to
yeah.
be willing to let it move through.
Okay.
Does that
Okay.
answer the question?
Yeah. I don't know if this was a question. It said, grief is also the reaffirming or evidence of a deep love too, if that makes sense. So
100%.
100%, yeah. I remember when my mom passed, she passed comfortably. Her heart, it was time. We had went through a lot of conversations and stuff. And I was young. I was raising my kids. They were still 6 and 7, 8, something like that. I mean, might be slightly a little bit older than that. But I remember she was giving me information, and I remember the time before, about a week, maybe 2 weeks before she passed, she was glowing.
Hmm.
She was just glowing. And she was, she wanted to give me money. She wanted to give the kids money. She wanted to, and we kept saying, no, mom, keep your money. We're going to, and it was 2 weeks before her birthday,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So she passed a week earlier than her birthday. But I remember being in charge of planning her birthday party. I remember not doing it right away. There was something that was not allowing me to move forward, to send out invitations, to do all of this stuff. So when my mom passed, I was at work. Every morning I would call her, and she's my best friend. I call her, I go, hey woman, what's going on? Yes, I talk to my mom like that,
I
you know,
love it.
and she didn't answer the phone. And immediately in my that ego mind, which was correct, something's wrong. And then the calm came in, like, oh well, she's going to get her hair done, that kind of thing. And then I got the call later that night to come over mom had passed, and my sister said the coroner's going to come pick her body up, and I want you to come. And kind of maybe I think you should leave the kids. I don't know if they need to see this kind of thing. And the thing was, I didn't have sadness. I had disbelief as I was driving there.
Mm-hmm.
That was the longest drive I ever took. It was just from, you're in California, so you know this. It was from the Valley
Mm-hmm.
to Wilshire, LA, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I swear that was like a 6 hour drive,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
there were no tears. There wasn't anything until I actually physically saw her. And then it was tears and the dam, and nobody else around me was doing this. You know, my older brother wasn't doing it. My sister wasn't doing it. And I'm looking, going, I'm bawling, going, what's wrong with you people? You didn't love mom like I did. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Starting to make those excuses and putting it on them
Yeah.
because doing it how I was going to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in that emotion, is that the right emotion to, is that the right process to ride that emotion with? The
You know,
process.
I think it's just so everyone's system and everyone's body and everyone's what gets activated inside of you is different, right? So like you saw it, I'm just and you're describing right now, and I experienced it with my family too. Like we react differently to different emotions. So there isn't any like right way to do it,
Mhm.
right? It's like sometimes it's even like what somebody has the capacity for, so like somebody who's not necessarily in like caring about conscious emotional processing, like sometimes what happens for them is it's going to get displaced in all these other ways, right? They're going to care about the finances of it. They're going to care about whether there's a funeral or not a funeral, or it gets displaced those other places.
Right.
When
Okay.
you're in touch with your emotions and you're in touch with your love for your mom, like it that's a natural response for you to have, and just the purity of that, what your body's doing, that's the right thing.
Oh,
What's whatever is correct for you. For someone else, they might be in shock for a few weeks, like they might not be able to feel anything for a little bit, and that's okay too. It,
okay.
our only goal is to really allow what wants to move through us and
Oh,
not judge that.
okay.
Make it as pure of a channel as possible. That's like our only job.
And not judge other people and not judge yourself because you're bawling so bad that you're about to drown. You put up the dam, and then you're crying so much that you're about to drown yourself. And don't judge yourself for it being that way. Just
Yeah.
kind of like float
Yeah.
until the emotion or the water just subsides.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you're the thing that we don't like even believe sometimes is that if you're just with it, then it actually go down, And it's like you don't know until you're there. It's a trust jump. You're like, I'm gonna let myself. I mean, like even this morning, the thing that I was experiencing this morning, I was like, can I go on this live today? Like
Mm,
where I'm at, I'm like I had like multiple waves, and I was like, I think I'm gonna be okay. But I had to really trust that I was gonna let it move through me and be strong enough to cry the tears, to do what I needed to do to move it through me, do breath work, whatever I needed. Not move it through me necessarily, but to be with it. And truly, when you be with it and you allow it to actually move, it's going to be okay. But we
right.
just don't have a lot of practice with that. We just,
No.
so it feels new,
Yeah.
and scary. So Melissa's saying everyone deals with or holds the emotion differently, but adding in the empath side, you can feel it and intensifies it. Oh, 100%, 100%. And I think that this is something that's really important to talk about. When we have extra sensitivity, like being an empath or being a highly sensitive person, and both, um, we have that extra sensitivity for a reason, because that extra sensitivity gives us an expanded perception. And like I was talking about before, this is a multidimensional reality, and the only limiting factor is our perception. So if we're an empath, a highly sensitive person, that that perception is expanded, expanded, expanded through everything we feel. Our only job is to become the best strongest container vessel for all that information to flow through. So we
uh,
have to have exquisite self-care. We want to have compassion for our empathy and everything that we sense, like love it so much and become the most powerful, clear channel for it to come through, because we're the ones who have the information to be able to bring in the new paradigm, who can see what's coming and feel it all. But it's a lot, it's a big job.
yeah, it, it sounds like it. It really is. I wish I had known a lot of this when I went through what my, especially, I think my mother was the tipping point for me understanding finite versus infinite, right?
Wow.
For me, even though there were people that were passing or having accidents or whatnot, she was my world, or my family was my world.
Yeah.
And past it, I finally, that was my moment learning what finite is. And that was not a great emotion for me. Finite is an emotion that you can get caught up in, because that's when I started to deal with. I didn't want to close my eyes at night when I slept. I was fear crept in. You know, I was fear crept in, and the unknown knowing of when I was next, or when my kids, I don't know when it'll be my kids. I don't,
Right.
all of that emotion, just like, and over a time, I think I kind of rode those, but the waves were big. They were the tsunamis of the 10 years of my life, from my 30s to my 40s, which was, I couldn't navigate that,
Yeah.
you know.
It's going beyond, it's a massive growth edge. Like I talk about that a lot. Like what's a growth edge, right? It's expanding our capacity. It's pushing up against the capacity we have. When we know how to be with emotion, we become much more fluent in expanding our capacity all the time. When we don't have those skills and we think that we need to cope with it, fix it, stop it, change it, just be better in some kind of way, we're in a wrestling match with that uncertainty, with that fear, because that's very real. Like when my mom died, I would worry about my dogs, like what's going to happen then, like because the pain of losing my mom was so great that the mind was like, I don't know if I can deal with that again. And then you start to look like, where else could this happen?
Right.
It's trying to protect ourselves, which is so understandable. Who wants to go through it?
Not me, but then a couple of years later, and a couple of months after my mom died, my dad passed. And I'm going to tell you, shit, it started all over again.
Yeah.
Right? Well, matter of fact, I don't think it started all over again. I think it just attached itself to that emotion that I was still riding, and it was humongous.
Yeah.
I there were two people. I think Melissa says,
We were talking about hers is the empath one.
okay, so Aries says, I went physically numb to life and reality, and I worked to, oh, hold on. I worked to get with a strong, beautiful place. Yeah. For me, for a while, I don't even think I worked to get to a strong, beautiful place. I just worked to, I just wanted the feeling to stop. And then looking at other people, looking at my sisters and brothers who weren't riding that wave like me, I started feeling like something's wrong with me.
Totally.
Something, right?
Yeah.
You know,
It's so natural for that to happen, right? Especially if you're the one who's feeling all the things. And it is like what this person was saying on Instagram. We always have the handle, so I don't know your first name, my love. But this part about being physically numb to life and reality, like so very real. That's us protecting ourselves, because the capacity is like our capacity for allowing life to move through us so so stretched. We have to be a little bit numb in order to make it happen. And then working towards getting to that strong, beautiful place is such a huge triumph. Huge. A lot of people will just shut down after that and just be like, nope, not doing it. And it can take a while, like you're saying, Sandra, like it can take a while.
Oh, it was a long while. It was literally, it was a stretch, because in that period from my mom passing, her brother, both her brothers passed, right? And I mean, just like a string, what felt to me like a string of, I'm going, life, why are you doing this to me? I wanted to blame life,
Totally.
I felt like if I blame life, then maybe I'd feel a little bit better with that emotion, right?
Yeah.
I think blame is another way of resisting, because I wasn't, it was like at that point, I was I was holding on to the surfboard upside down under the water while the waves kept hitting me, because it was my uncle, it was my favorite uncle, and then it was my uncle who wasn't my favorite, but I still kind of, it was part of my mom's, you know,
Yeah.
family. And it was all the way I looked at it, the way my mind uh, voiced it to me. Oh, all the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family are passing away. That means you step up. When's your turn?
Right. So scary. So
Right?
scary. Yeah. Yeah. And that these questions really come up like when the grief is happening and you get thing after thing. Like, I mean, I had a little conversation with God this morning. Like, what do you want? Like, what do you want? Like, what is your plan here? Um,
Yeah.
that's just part of the process, right?
Right.
Um, it's just so real. So what Melissa's saying, the duality that comes with it also, the spiritual side is grateful for having them in our lives, but also the human side of not wanting to let them go. It just makes sense. My apologies. I have not woken.
No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, my apologies. I have not
I have
woke.
just, she said I've just woken up. Oh, of
Oh,
course, no problem. But
okay.
what you're bringing up about the human side and the spiritual side, Melissa, is such an interesting point because I don't know how much you know about Mary Magdalene, but in my beliefs, Mary Magdalene was Jesus' counterpart. And she, in her book, there's a book, I think it's the Magdalene manuscripts, and in this book, she's talking about the experience of watching Jesus be crucified, and she says, the human part of me is like gutted, and the higher dimensional part of me knows that this is the way. This is the way for him to be crucified. Like this is what it is. But the human part of me is gutted, and that's the truth. Like no matter what, like we're gonna miss him. I miss picking up the phone and talking to my mom.
Yes.
And I'm also so grateful that I can pick up the psychic phone and talk to her.
And talk to her.
Yeah.
I am so grateful. I was just in the last couple of weeks, I mean, literally, Source did a deep dive with me. Deep. Source says, you've been treading the top of the water and you've been looking at the top of the glacier and you think it's magnanimous. You think it's magnanimous. You're about to go deep. You're about to see the whole glacier in all of it, and literally just woke me up to the fact that my father, the reason I never got to say goodbye to my father, because he slipped into a coma. I didn't say goodbye to him. I didn't get to say goodbye to my mom. I knew we had a conversation, my mom and I released her from her staying because she thinks that she needed to stay because of family, to make everybody, to fix everybody. She wanted to fix kids and make, she didn't want to leave because they were all at odds with each other. And finally, I told her it was okay, right? Hell, you know, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was giving her the grace to leave. I didn't know that. And I didn't know she was going to leave without saying goodbye. So literally Source I mean, I was on 2 or 3 lives where Source was coming through and these people were saying, I'm feeling your mom right now. She says she didn't say goodbye because she never left you. And then I was in a meditation, I think a week ago, and literally a bathtub meditation, and all the source said, look around you. You think they left you, but they didn't. They're your guardian angels now. They came in place of. And then spiritually, I haven't felt this good about them, knowing that they're there. They're just there. Maybe dimensionally with my eyes, my physical eyes, I can't see them. But that was like, okay, that was a fucking deep live. I love that. But where were you when I was 30? Right? And Source told me, you're blaming me.
That's what I mean, is the part of like everything exists. It's just our perception that's the
Right.
difference.
Um, uh, you're here, but I can't hear. Anybody else here? Oh, then she says, there we go. So she's in there. Hi, goddess.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So yeah, so it's one of those things, like the most important thing we can do is continue to expand our perception so that we can have contact with everything that is there. Our
Right,
loved ones who are not on this side, the information that we have, the answers that we have to the questions that we have in life. You know, like we're just here to open and become channels for life to move through us. And
right.
how can we do that? Everyone has their own way.
Now, is that when you do okay, so we talked about the vibrational thread, the 0 point masterclass. Now, that's about dismantling what old stories you have. Because I'm always talking about, you got to go in and you got to sift and sort through your consciousness. And then I realized that when we're having when somebody's pushing our buttons, is that a acknowledgement that you've got an old story that you've got to dismantle?
100%. Every trigger is an activation. It's an opening for us. Like, the person who did it is not the person. There is no bad guy. So that's another masterclass that I have, and it'll be coming soon as part of a bundle. Um, but it is the point of the matter. Like any trigger, of course, we want to blame. Like even in the thing that I had, what you said about God, like where was this when I was 30, or my like thing to God today, like what is your plan? Like why is this going on? There is, even though we're going to want to blame, there is no bad guy. This is a game between you and you, me and me. Right. We're here to grow and evolve, and spirit is just dropping things in that will activate us in the best possible ways for our growth if we choose to take it. And as long as we stay invested in that, we're good. It takes as long as it takes.
Right. Yeah. It took literally 30 years, to figure out, well, all of my family that passed, all my matriarchs and patriarchs that passed, because I took it personally. They died and I took it personally. Right. Okay. And I know that sounds, for certain people, that's like, wait a minute, they just passed away and you're taking it all personal, that they either, I think my uncle got brain cancer. You're taking it personally because he got that. But yeah, I took it personally. And when you take it personally, that's a story that I feel that I wrote myself. And then my egoic self said, oh, great story. Let's file it away because we're going to use it again. Right.
Yeah.
30 years, it's been coming up, in one way or another.
Yeah. And the time that passes is so helpful because then you've grown in different ways. You have a different perspective. So now you can use that opening when those feelings of taking it personal get triggered, when the memories get triggered, then you have the ability, as you said, to dismantle it and rewrite it because you're at a different level of consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah.
See how all of your master classes, they build on each other, right?
Yeah.
Is that what Source is doing when Source is giving you these downloads? It's building upon each other, right?
I mean, I didn't design it that way. I never know, but that's how source works in my estimation, like always building. Um, so yeah, so there will be more master classes that come this year. Another thing that's going to happen soon is I am going to announce an opportunity to um, be able to look at what our next steps are in terms of our emotional intelligence. So our emotional intelligence and our mastery is the levels are infinite, right? And I wish that someone would have come along and said like, hey, here's like you're doing really great with emotion, but here's the next step for you. Here's the next frontier,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could move beyond, because for so long I was stuck in the place of we cope and we fix. We cope and we fix. It's a dead end. Like they're good things, but we need to move beyond them. And luckily with being a channel for crystalline emotion, I get to see more further down the road, and I've had to travel every single step along the way. So that's one thing that I'm bringing to my community in the next few weeks, is getting the opportunity to set up a call with me for 20 minutes to just look at like, let's do a little check-in to find out what that next step could be for you.
Oh,
Yeah, so master classes are coming. That free opportunity is coming, and every week there's always like new stuff that Spirit is bringing through um, in my content on Instagram. I freaking love Instagram. I love being able to share on here because it really taps on my creativity, and it inspires me to say things in new and different ways.
yeah. I Instagram is my testing ground, but it's so wonderful because Source works really. I don't know. Source works really well with it in my training process, right? And everybody, this is my first podcast. This is on podcast person to person, right?
I love
You
it.
guest, right? You are my first guest. Source told me who to contact. I said, okay, how do I do this? You know, I have so many great people. And Source said, well, you're gonna eventually interview them all.
Yeah,
But we start with, I want you to tell people about emotion. I said, well, I only know one person. Let me, and Source says, I said, well, let me call her and see if she'll, let me DM her and see if she's available. So I said, she's available, right? And I went, okay, right? So like I have a podcast. I have a podcast on iTunes and Spotify, and it has a lot of my best reels that Source has chosen. And on my vision board, what was left was I want to do a podcast and I want to interview guests. And Source just said, okay, that's next. And the egoic mind went with, I'm scared, right?
for
It,
sure.
and I had to, I wrote that. What I did was, nope, I'm not scared. Nope, just I'm going to think positive thoughts and I'm going to. But what it did, so fear came out again, right? But right behind it was excitement. And because I was caught up in the fear, I didn't see the excitement, right?
Yeah, yeah, so good.
And, but it's still, that was a button that was pushed because I pushed the fear button. So I'm still riding that fear button. And then I had a conversation with someone else on IG who just said, take a step back, take a breath, take it in, and said, could you be riding the feeling of excitement, right? And I said, I didn't think about that. And I said, maybe. I said, okay, then excitement pushed fear forward and out. And I didn't know that excitement could come in like that and just go by. So in this in the emotions, is that possible? Is that what happened to me?
Yeah, because you caught yourself trying to
Sabotage it?
and be positive about the fear, and instead you were like, okay, I'm going to let it be there. And then what happened is it alchemized, because it's like, quantum physics, like as soon as something's observed it changes,
Oh,
right?
right.
All of a sudden it changed. And really, like, fear, the crystalline version of fear is wholeness. So more of who you are is being able to do this work of having conversations like this and putting them out in the world. That's more of who you are. So of course fear is going to come up when you're going to become more whole.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank you. Uh, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah, when you alchemize fear, then what's behind it can get there, can get to you. And a lot of times, for is it Fitzpearl says, um, nervousness is excitement without the breath. So nervous and excited are very similar to one another.
uh and so when I was talking to my colleague, not my colleague, my friend, um, the moment Source used him to actually focus me on what my feelings were. That was the download or the upload or the or like the battery cable giving me a jump and going jump started. Here she is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally, totally.
This says fear equals false evidence appearing real. I like that. I
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
is that is is that what emotions are? Sometimes they're, even though we feel them, even though they are ours, we
Yeah,
create them.
yeah.
We create the story around them.
We create the story around them.
Right.
It's it's that the fear, usually the fear by itself in a pure form is not necessarily bad. It's just we've been trained that unless you're in actual danger, and it fear like that's in response to actual physical danger is not bad either. It's makes you move. But the fear that's about something that's not physically dangerous, immediately if we start to feel that uncomfortable sensation, then the ego comes in to create evidence for why that's happening,
Yeah.
which is where the false evidence appearing real comes in. But if we literally just stayed with the sensation, like if you know what the sensation of fear feels like for you, and you don't have to engage in any stories about it, it's all good. Like it's all fine. It's okay that the fear is there. Of course, your fear is going to be there. It's another step. Like any big step that you take in life, fear is going to come up.
Right. Exactly. Because yesterday I was on I was on a live with God is changing the code and my saving grace, and my two things happened earlier that day, and one of them I was discussing that I was on a live with my saving grace. My baby sister came in and she was asking me some questions, right? And she's a born again Christian, right? My spirituality has moved from that direction because the question my question that I've always had since I'm a kid is what's next, or why doesn't this fit? And if I ask why it doesn't fit, it means that I've got this visual perception of a puzzle piece board, and all of a sudden the pieces don't fit anymore, and there's another piece that has to be opened up to me to either move me along or give me a reason to stay, right? And for me, a lot of the pieces did not fit, and that made me have to go and ask more questions and read more books and go to and listen to more, not just lives, but listen to more, Michael Beckwith and Eckhart Tolle, and because it was like, okay, there's more than just the God in the sky. There's more. I know there's more. It doesn't fit. So the last time she and I had talked, she was asking me if I was still worshiping the same God because I'd moved on.
Yeah.
And that it started in my feelings got hurt, which is number one emotion, because, you know, she was making me seem like I was wrong for moving on. And that was my perception of her. I'm realizing now that that's my perception, but it was an emotion. And basically, literally, up until yesterday, that emotion was still there and I was riding it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because she came on my live, we were talking about source and we used the title source. And she asked, what source? And I realized it was my sister. And I said, source is God. And then the other person in the live said, well, I don't prefer to use God. I use another term, right? And then after that, when the only next thing that my sister retorted in her comment was in capital letters. She says, the fullness of God in grace in caps. I know what she meant by that because the last conversation that we had, she was, you know, I told her that there were things that I believed that the Bible couldn't, there were missing pieces. And that was one of the last things she said to me about the Bible and stuff. But I didn't know I was writing that fear, or not that fear, that no, I think it was fear and hurt all at the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're, when we stay with the, sorry.
No problems. Right. So I do know that I worked through a little bit of it, but I still feel that there's some that I got to work through. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation about that type of, how do you work through that type of emotion with family?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure my battery is now telling me that I have only a little bit left, so I have to wrap up because it'll just go dark anyway.
Oh,
Can
well,
you see
that, well, in that case, can we do a part two?
We can absolutely do a part two. Can you see and hear me okay right now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me answer your question. I can totally do a part two, but I can answer this question really quickly.
Okay.
So when it's the same with family, I mean, with family, it can get a little bit more intense, but in this situation, right, you identified really clearly it's hurt and it's fear. So without any of the stories of the past, without any stories at all, who your sister is, who anything is just being like, okay, where do I feel hurt? Like, where is that actual sensation in my body? Is it like a tightness in my stomach? Okay, can I stay with that until it's complete, right? Okay, where's the fear? Can I stay with that sensation until it's complete? And then what happens is when the fear or the hurt actually completes, there's information that starts to bubble up. Like you get a vision, you get a memory, you get something happens and information is unlocked and is given to you. And
Right.
that's when you start to have those experiences of an emotion completing and then information being given to you, you start to understand that the stories are not that valuable. In fact, they get in the way of those other processes.
Okay.
Because the more we start to think about, we psychoanalyze it. Well, my sister said it because of this. That's so da 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 condescending, like mean, passive aggressive, whatever you want to think about that.
Right.
As long as we get stuck there in the story of what that means about who she is, then
Okay.
we keep on repeating the feeling. We can't get complete because we're so bothered about the fact that she's XYZ, which
Okay.
could be true. Your analysis might be like on point, but it's not.
Right.
It doesn't help us, right, to
Right.
actually metabolize the emotion.
Right. So I don't feel the tightness in the tightness in my gut area anymore, and the tightness in my heart space is gone. So actually I've been doing the right thing and allowing it to, to get on the surfboard and just kind of wade through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can do it very like consciously in a very like potent way and for over the course of a few minutes. Or you can just let it be there for the course of a few days and just be like, let me stay curious and open to what this wants to show me.
Right. And what's next,
Yeah.
and who I'm going to be after it just subsides, right? after the water actually the best word I think is recedes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Then there's more revealed.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So this has been such a beautiful conversation. I really love like your questions, the flow of our conversation, the beautiful wisdom that you bring through, like your community. I love it all. Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel so honored.
Oh, I feel honored. I feel honored because Source knew, just knew, and I just, I complied. I said, okay. Source said, no doubt. I said, okay. You know how you can get where you look at Source and you want to go, really? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so much. Please let them, the my fellow audience, know where they can contact you,
Yes.
or they can do your workshops and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. So the best way is to follow me on Instagram because that's where it's my favorite spot. That's where I love to share all of the
Right.
goodness that comes through, and I really love stories. So that's where you see like the behind the scenes. Like if I'm going to talk about the crystalline version of an emotion, that's the very best place to see me talk about it. Um, so Instagram, and then Instagram is where you're going to see me tell you what's coming up, and especially in my stories. In my stories is where you get all the good stuff. So come and follow me over there if you are interested. And of course, if you have questions, come to my DMs and I'm happy to have a chat.
Yes, and hit the arrow up above, and please follow Adrian. We're soul family. Please follow. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. All right,
Thank
we will DM each other for part 2.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye bye. All right, everyone. I thank you for tuning in and tapping in and turning on and being asking the great questions and just being here and supporting. So have a blessed day. Be a creator. Have a beautiful and wonderful thought. If that thought is for your greater good, create with it, and then step into your physicality of where the manifestation and your allowing moment meet, and be happy, be satisfied, be beautiful, be great. You are awareness being aware. Take care. Thank you.